Welcome. In this video I'm going to be replacing the battery in this early 2015 MacBook Pro. So before we get started I want to say that this can be very dangerous. Lithium batteries can catch on fire. So to minimize risk I've depleted the battery. I never plan on charging it back up, so that will take some of the energy out of it. It's also good to work on non-flammable surfaces or have non-flammable surfaces nearby. So you could take the laptop off and say put it on a concrete floor. So a garage would be a good place to work on this. Now I am in my basement only because I'm recording a video. Typically I would do something like this in a garage. Also you want to have safety equipment, and if you don't feel comfortable doing this safely, then definitely don't do it. And probably the most important thing is to make sure you back up your computer before you work on it, because there's always a chance you'll screw something up and you don't want to lose any data. You can always replace your computer, but you may not be able to replace your data. So the battery I'm going to be putting in is this NinjaBatt, and if you find this video helpful and you want to purchase one of these, I'll put a link to it in the description on Amazon, and if you use that link it helps me out a little bit and doesn't cost you anything extra. So here is a user manual, a safety precautions. It talks about the first use. It says use the battery until the level is about 10%. Connect your AC adapter and fully charge the battery. Repeat this practice 5 times to reach maximum capacity. So what they're talking about here is cycling the battery. And I've seen some that say run it all the way down or until the computer shuts off. I haven't seen an instruction that says use it to 10%. But the thing is, the battery management system in the Mac will shut it off before it depletes it to 0. So after I install the battery, I'll use it till it shuts the computer off. I'll plug it in, let it charge up to 100%. And then do that a couple times. Now, that gets to my next point. This battery in here is about 2 years old and it's expanding, it's like bubbling up, and the previous battery in it did the same thing. And I think the reason that's happening is because I didn't power cycle it. It only had like 18 cycles on it. I left this plugged in too often. So it's a good idea every month or two to deplete the battery completely and then charge it up so it can calibrate the charging circuit in here. So here's the battery. It comes with some tools, and this has adhesive on the bottom. So let me talk about some of the tools I'm going to be using. So it came with some screwdrivers, but I'm using this Tribito toolkit. This has other tools in it like pry tools and spudgers and things. So this was provided to me for a previous video, but they have no association with this video. And I'll put a link below to this kit and other supplies I'm using. I'm also using this little, it's just a little metal tray. It could be any metal tray. And I have a syringe and some acetone. So I'll be putting the acetone in the metal dish. Acetone can dissolve plastic, so you wouldn't want to use a little plastic dish. You want to use metal. Now there are some plastics you can put acetone in. If you know what those are, you could use those, but metal's a sure thing. So this is to dissolve the adhesive in the battery. Some people like to use rubbing alcohol. I like acetone. Acetone's highly flammable. It's very volatile. It stinks, but I use just tiny amounts of it. So you'll want to know how to safely use acetone if you're doing this. And then I have a tiny syringe to distribute the acetone. So to get started, I want to put some aluminum foil in between the screen and keyboard. So if the acetone gets on this, it can ruin it. So I'll just place this in here like so. Now I want to remove the perimeter screws. In my toolkit, these are the 1.2 pentalobe screws. So these can be under pressure in here, so you want to be careful. It's a good idea to wear eye protection. So I'm going to take the screw out and I'll kind of hold my fingers here to catch the screw if it does pop. So that one seemed okay. So I'll set the screws out next to where I take them out. So this doesn't have as much pressure in it as it did when I previously replaced it, but it is definitely pressing the lid up. Okay, I have all the screws out. So I'm going to take the cover off. I'll set it back here on my bench, and then I'm going to move the screws into position where they will go so I can keep track of things. Okay, so you can see the battery here. It has expanded. Our next step is to disconnect the battery, which is here. So as you're working on this, you want to be aware of static electricity. So if it's very dry, you have to be very careful. Now you can use anti-static mats and grounding wrist straps and things like that. I tend to not use those very often, but you do want to ground yourself to the case regularly as you're working on it. So when I touch this case here, that will ground me. So that will put my body at the same potential as the case. And then I want to peel off this piece of tape here, covering the battery connector. So here we can see the battery connector. I've moved around to the backside and zoomed in so you can see this here. But you can see a little lip on either side of this connector, and you'll want to hook under that and lift up. So you want to be very careful you don't damage this. Like so. And now we have the battery disconnected. I'll zoom out so you can have a perspective of where we were at. And here's zoomed out even more, and I'll go back to where I was. So I pulled that back so it's not going to fall back down in contact. Next we want to remove 2 T5 Torx screws right here. I'll take this little plate off. Now I'm going to set this and the screws aside together so I can keep track of them. And I'm going to keep things kind of in order as I take things off so I know the order they go back in. Next we'll take a spudger and remove this connector. So we'll pull that up. Next, we're going to disconnect this connector here. I'll be using the wedge end of this pick style spudger, and I'll put it under here. And that's disconnected. So we'll take the speaker cable here and carefully pull it out. Now don't pull it completely out. We have to take the speaker out still too. To take the speaker out, we have 3 screws here, here, and here, and they're T5 Torx. So these are the screws top to bottom. The top one is longer and not threaded all the way. The middle one is longer and threaded all the way, and the bottom one is shorter. So I can pull the speaker out. It's kind of under this notch right here. So when I set this aside again, I'm going to put the screws in the positions that they go in this. Now that is a speaker and it contains a magnet, and I've had an issue before where I set it down on my bench and I went to retrieve it and it was missing a screw, and the screw was just stuck to the side of the speaker. So make sure to check for that if you're missing a screw. Let's go to the other side. This is the left speaker, which is on the right side as I'm looking at it in the video. Same deal here. I have my spudger. Going to go under here and disconnect the speaker. And we have the T5 screws to take the speaker out. So I'll take this out. We have to be careful of the wire going under the case here. And we have the speaker out. Okay, so I'm back in this orientation. Next we want to disconnect the trackpad connector, same as the other connectors. So this is adhered to the battery. You want to be very careful removing this. So it was not stuck down very much because these are expanded. Now we need to remove the cable here, and this is a 0 insertion force connection. So let me get zoomed in on it. Okay, so I've turned this sideways to hopefully get a better angle on it, but I'll lift this flap up. And there's a little black bar here. I'm going to stick the spudger under there, try this other one here, and I want to lift up on that black bar to release the cable. There we go. So this has that adhesive on it, but what I'm going to do is kind of lift it away from the battery and slide it out of there. It can be a little tricky because the battery is bulked up right now. I'm just going slow. I'm going to use the spudger to push down on this just a little bit to help me get it out of there without stressing it too much. Okay, I got that out. Now when you're done with this, if your trackpad's not working, if your speaker's not working, needless to say, go back through and double check your connections. Now it's certainly always possible that you will damage something. Hopefully whatever you damage is a replaceable part. So there's only one screw holding this entire battery in. It's right up here. It's a T5. So I'll get that out. So now we can just lift the battery out, right? Well, no, we have adhesive under this. So we went through all that difficult work and it just got us to the beginning of this process. So let's go through getting this battery out. So as I mentioned earlier, I'll be using acetone to break down the adhesives here. And I've got a couple different supplies on hand. I have this card from an arcade. It's like a key card for a hotel, but you could use an old credit card or something. And I'll be using this to get under here to pull this away. You don't want to use anything sharp. You don't want to puncture the battery. You don't want to bend the battery. That can cause all sorts of problems. I also have some scrap paper. So once I peel this up, it could stick back down. So I'll just tear off a piece of paper here and stick it under there against the adhesive. Of course, I have things like paper towels. I have a trash nearby. So let's get started on this. I've got my tray here. I'll put a little bit of acetone in it. I'm going to suck this up with my syringe. And like everything else here, syringes can be very dangerous. So if you don't feel comfortable with them, this may not be for you. So I'm going to inject some acetone under the battery here. And I'll squirt some of this out in my pan here, and it squirts pretty straight. So you might want to do a little test there to see if it squirts to the side at all. Now acetone will ruin surfaces. If I got it on my bench here, it would probably ruin the finish, so keep that in mind. So I let that sit for a minute. I may need to let it sit longer, but I'm going to get under here and try and pry this up. So that acetone softened up that adhesive. So this cell is out of the way. I can put some under the next one. And I'm looking down there and I'm squirting it right up against the junction of the battery with the case. You can see a little line there. I'm being very careful not to puncture the battery though. Now you could wear rubber gloves doing this. Some people might want to do that. Okay, so I have that up. And if you're curious how much acetone I'm using, I don't even smell it yet. Now I haven't put my nose down near it, but it's not a tremendous amount. So I should have had my paper ready, but I'll tear that off now. Get one ready for the other side too. So I'm going to do the other side here and I'll be speeding up the video. Okay, so I have the two sides off. Now I'm going to work on the middle area. So when I get this out, I'll need to place it somewhere. So I'm just going to have this tray ready to set it in. There may be sticky stuff on the bottom of this still. Okay, so the battery's out. Now we have a lot of adhesive left over here. You want to clean that out with acetone. I'm guessing you could potentially use something like Goof Off or Goo Gone. You need a clean substrate for the new battery to stick to. So I am starting to smell the acetone a little bit. So there's a technique I just figured out to take this off. Take some paper, press it against it, and hopefully it'll stick to the paper and not the case. Okay, so I'm going to cut the video here and I'll come back when this is cleaned off. This will be easier if I can move the camera out of the way. But I'll just be using these same techniques. I'll also be using acetone and a paper towel to wipe the surfaces. Okay, so I got that cleaned up. It's not perfect, but it's definitely good enough. So you can wet paper towels with the acetone and wipe the adhesive off. Make sure you switch spots of the paper towel frequently because the paper towel will absorb the adhesive and the acetone and then it will just redeposit it. So I had to do that a number of times. There's a little bit of streaking here, but it's clean enough to hold the new adhesive. So you want to take the old battery to a battery recycler. You'll just have to search in your area to find one. Definitely don't throw it away in the trash. That can be super dangerous and it's very irresponsible. So now let's get the new battery in. So the new battery has this plastic on the top and the bottom. The bottom is for the adhesive and the top kind of holds the battery structure until you install it. So you don't want to take this plastic off until it's installed. So if you remember when we took this out, we only had one screw to remove. So we'll only have one screw to put it back in. So what I'll first do is I'll fit this in place to see how it fits. This is where you find out if you've got the right battery or not. So we can see these pieces of plastic go here on the outsides. I want the connector to line up. I want this screw hole to line up. So I have my T5 screw ready and my Torx ready. And this is probably one of the trickier parts here. I need to remove the plastic coating off here. Now you do want to be slow with this. This plastic you're peeling off can pull up the adhesive if you're not careful. You can see there's kind of a bubble here. So I'm going to get the T5 Torx ready. I'm using a magnetic screwdriver here, so I'll set that down. I'm going to take the battery and I want to get that screw in. So I'm going to try and float the battery above the whole case while I do this. Okay, I have it in there quite a few threads. I could probably tighten it down a little more. And now I can set the battery in place. Like so. I think that's good. So I can see it's tight right down here, tight right down here. I'll finish tightening this now. So it can be tricky if you don't get this positioned right the first time. You'd have to potentially peel it back up. So I have the parts I've been using in order here. So I'll just actually pull from these to reinstall them in the laptop. So here we have that zero insertion force connector, and we have the little bar is up. So I need to slide this under it. That can be a little tricky. I'll have my spudger ready to help guide it if needed. Okay, I have it in. I'll clamp that down and I'll put the adhesive plastic back on top. That locks it in place. So now I'll route this as straight as I can. I actually have one more thing to do, is I need to pull the plastic off the top of the battery. So I want the trackpad cable, it will adhere to the battery here and it will connect up to the port. So you want that straight on there and press straight down. And it seems like it might have expanded this. Okay, so there's a little bit of a Z-fold here, so if you have slack, you kind of want to push it that way. I don't love how that went on there, but I think it's going to work. Now I'll install the speakers back in place. I'm going to speed through a lot of this, but I'll stop the video if there's anything of note. So I want to make sure to get this wire under this little bracket. Now this was a little tight here, it did fit. Now I haven't really pressed down on this adhesive, so if I had to lift this up a little bit and push it that way, I could probably do that still. When assembling things, I like to get all of the screws started first. You want to be careful not to cross thread. A lot of times I'll put the screw in, I'll turn it backwards until I hear it click. That means the thread is lined up. Then I'll start to tighten it down. And I can go ahead and connect this speaker connector right back up. Just press it in. Now I'll reroute this speaker cable and plug it in. You want to have it under this I/O cable. Okay, I'll reattach the I/O cable. Now you really shouldn't have to force any of this. It should go together easily. If you need to get like a magnifying glass or a bright light to help you see, make sure you do that. Finally here we'll put this plate on. So if you're lucky at this point, you don't have any screws or brackets left except for the back case screws. The final step is connecting the battery here. So this can be a little bit tricky because it may not be in the exact alignment as the previous one. I need to pull this adhesive off first from the back of the connector. That'll make it a little bit more flexible. So now I can get this position in place. I may need to bend the wires a little bit. There we go. And normally I would speed that up, but I did it at real time so you can see how long that actually took me. I wanted to do it right. So now I'll put the adhesive back on. That'll kind of fix it in place. So now I'm going to try and get this foil out of here. It's kind of driving me nuts. Oops. So now this should be able to boot up. So what I would recommend, if you can be very careful, is to put the back cover on. Now, if you remember, I said put the back cover somewhere and put the screws around it. So when you're doing that, remember the orientation. So I have the cover back here. It says MacBook Pro up high. So I'll lift it up, make sure not to knock any of the screws out of the way, and I'll set this on here. Like so. I'm going to turn it over. I'm going to see if it works. And then when I'm done, I'll put it back like this. I'll make sure MacBook Pro is in this orientation. I'll know how to put the screws back in. So I'll hit the power button. So again, you'll want to go through the procedure for calibrating the battery, let it run until it goes to sleep. Pay attention to it. Don't let it go to sleep, then come back a week later and charge it. When it goes to sleep, plug it in, let it charge up to 100%, and then maybe do that a couple times. And then hopefully to keep this from happening again in the future, I'm going to do that every few months. Okay, so we're booted up. I'm testing the trackpad. It's working. You want to test the speakers. So I'll go into my system settings. I'll turn the sound all the way up. I'll go to my sound control panel, I'll go to sound effects, and I'll play one. Okay, my alert volume is low, I'll turn that up. I'll go back to my output and I'll switch to the right speaker, go to sound effects again. I'll go to output, go to left speaker, sound effects again. Put that back in the middle. So everything seems to be working, at least the things that I potentially would have affected, like the trackpad and the speakers. Those are the main things you should test. So I think this is going to be good to go. So when we're doing the calibration, we don't want this to fall asleep, and you can go and change your energy settings, but I actually like to go into this desktop and screensaver and set a hot corner. So I'll go down here to hot corners, and you have the 4 corners, and you can say disable screensaver for the one. We'll hit OK. And then get this set up, drag your mouse to the bottom right. So it's way down here in the corner and leave it there. And that will keep your computer from going to sleep. And then if you want to do it a little faster, you could turn your back light up. You could even like put a movie on or something that will draw the battery down a little faster. So at this point, you should shut it down before you put the screws in the back. I'm not going to follow my advice. I'm going to close it. Be very, very careful. And then I can get these screws back in. Now I've been using that T5 Torx. I want to switch back to my pentalobe for this. And again, I'm going to start all of the screws before I tighten them down completely. Okay, that's completed. So this is a long procedure to do this. If you're doing it, take your time, be careful, be safe, and hopefully at the end, you'll have your battery replaced and you can get some more life out of your computer. So that's all I'm going to cover in this video. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. If you like this video, please click like. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, I'd appreciate if you could do that. And thanks for watching. Until next time, goodbye.